Read number 1. Think outside the magic circle. The standard ritual outline that has come down to us is the standard Wiccan circle, of course. Cast a circle, call the quarters, invoke the god, invoke the goddess, etc., etc., etc. Could rattle it off in your sleep. This is a perfectly effective ritual form in its own way under the right circumstances. I've been to some really wonderful Wiccan circles. It is, of course, a ritual which does actually descend to us from the most ancient pagan times. Its roots are, Gardner, of course, derived it from, let's see, the Book of the Key of Solomon and other Renaissance grimoires, which ultimately derive the ritual itself through various generations of grimoires and magical... The standard Wiccan circle takes its origin from, let's see, Gardner derived the standard Wiccan circle, or what has become the standard Wiccan circle, largely from the Key of Solomon and various other grimoires, which ultimately derive from the magic circles of late Hellenistic period Alexandrian theurges. So these, of course, are not originally religious rituals. These are magical rituals, and that's an interesting distinction. And of course, in the Gardnerian craft and in the craft generally, the distinction between the two is not so hard and fast as it is in some other traditions. However, this ritual form is at its very best with a small, relatively intimate group of people in a small enclosed space. One cannot use this ritual form effectively as the group gets larger and larger. As the group gets much larger than about 20. If you have ever been at one of those rituals at a festival where the ritual is a quarter of an acre around and you can't even see the faces of the people on the other side of the circle, and it takes Lady Moon Whistle 5 minutes to walk around the entire perimeter with the sword, you know what I mean. If the recipe for the cake will feed 9 people, nice coven-sized recipe, well and good. You may be able to double the recipe. But if you need a cake to feed 90, you cannot take the recipe, put in 9 times the amounts of all the ingredients, bake it in a container that's 9 times the size of the original, in an oven at 9 times the temperature in which you bake the original cake. It won't work. Ritual forms like recipes have a point beyond which they will not expand. I would suggest that the standard operating procedures that we were many of us taught coming up into this simply don't work in the context of large ritual. So we need to start thinking outside the magic circle. How do we do this? Well, let me tell you a story. A number of years ago, I was invited to a local pagan group which was doing a public ritual. They gave me a call. Steve, you're a good ritualist. You want to come to the ritual planning committee? Sure, I'd be happy to. So I went in, we all sat down, and after the gossiping and the... So we all sat down and got started, and the first question that they asked was, of course, the question that should never, ever, ever, under any circumstances, be the first question that you ask at a ritual planning meeting, which is, of course, how do we cast the circle? Why should this not be the first question that is asked at a ritual planning meeting? Well, we'll get to that later. But for the time being, we're going around the circle. The first person says, in my tradition, we cast the circle with a sword. By the way, if there was one phrase that I could kill from pagan, it would be, in my tradition, we. I hate this phrase. It is dishonest and it is manipulative. Let me translate in my tradition, we into real language. Let me translate it into which for you. What in my tradition means is, the way I like to do it is, and we're dishonestly pulling in other people and pulling in this claim of tradition that in my ear rings very falsely. So the first person says, in my tradition we cast the circle with a sword. And the next person says, in my tradition we cast the circle with a wand. So it gets to me, and I say, well, I don't usually cast circles. And there's a beat, and then we move on to the next person going around the table. So we go all the way around, and then they ask, you know, the second thing that should never be the second question that you ask at a ritual planning meeting. So the first person once again says, in my tradition, we call the air in the east. And the second person says, in my tradition, we call the air in the south. And so it gets to me, and I say, well, I don't usually work with the 4 elements, and I don't generally call quarters. So you can kind of hear the same thought forming in all of the other skulls around the table. Everyone is like, gee, there's this guy and he's supposed to be this respected community elder, and instead he's just this obstructionist asshole. So after that, I learned my lesson, and I shut up, and I let them plan the ritual that they wanted to do. But we need to start thinking outside the magical circle. What are the things that we can do that will give people the sense, for instance, that the ritual has begun? Well, there are lots of things. We need to keep our eyes and ears open. If we're going to call quarters, for instance, as I say, I don't always do it, but you know, sometimes. And I can tell you, many of the most effective rituals, the most deeply moving rituals, the life-changing rituals that I have been to have not taken place in a caste circle. I've had no quarters called. Don't ever let anybody tell you that these things have to happen, because that's simply not true. That is dogma, and it is a dogma that we don't need. It is a lie. I have found one of the things that happens at festivals here in the Midwest, I don't know whether this happens at other places, is that often before a meeting, especially the morning meeting, when everybody gets together, about 15 minutes before the ritual, the drums begin to play. The drummers come in and they have a drum jam, and people dance, or sometimes the drummers just play. And people gather during the course of it, and the drummers play for about 10, 15 minutes. And when everybody has got there, or when a lot of people have got there, then the drums stop. There's your moment. That is a moment of beginning. That is a moment of beginning that does not need to be explained. When the drums stop, everybody knows that something is about to happen. This is how ritual can work. If you need to call quarters, my suggestion is that one consider doing it in a non-verbal way. I am a big exponent of horns, conch shells, a horn in each quarter. Do, 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 wah, all of them together. You could do the same with conch shells. Horns have that nice sort of pagany look to it. There are other options. Think about it. You'll come up with lots of things.